Carlos Alcaraz arrived at Monte Carlo this week as the defending champion, as the world number one, the youngest man in history to complete a career Grand Slam, and as the man carrying more ranking points into this clay swing than any player on tour has ever had to defend at his age. And when the press gathered around him and asked how he was approaching all of that, the titles, the expectations, the 4,300 points sitting on a knife's edge across the next 2 months, he said something that I have not been able to stop thinking about since. He said he wasn't thinking about defending a title at all, that it was just about feeling good on the court again. Most people heard that and nodded. Some called it refreshingly humble, revealing that it showed maturity beyond his years. In my opinion, however, they completely misread what he just told them. What Alcaraz said in that press conference was not a sign of a player who has found peace, but the sound of a player quietly describing something that no number one in the world should ever have to rediscover. I'm not thinking about defending a title. It's about how I feel, and right now I'm just trying to have good sensations. Carlos Alcaraz said at Monte Carlo press conference prior to the tournament. Then in March, after his loss to Sebastian Korda, this is what he said. Obviously the players I'm playing against, I think they don't have the pressure they usually get when they play another player. I'm feeling they have more to win than to lose in those matches. They're playing without pressure. There is something in the gap between those two quotes that tells you everything you need to know about where Carlos Alcaraz actually is right now. It is worth sitting with both of them for a moment before we go any further. Because something about these quotes is striking at me. It is not about what he said, but about what he was trying not to say. A player chasing something talks about hunting. A player who is confident in their position talks about executing their game plan, about the opponents they are looking forward to facing, about the titles they are eyeing. Alcaraz, on the other hand, is doing none of that. Instead, he is talking about sensations and about how he feels. He is asking for permission, essentially, to just play tennis again. And this codedly tells us something deep about what the world number one ranking is actually doing to him. To understand what is happening to Alcaraz right now, you have to understand something about what the number one ranking actually demands at this level. It is not what most people think it is. The common assumption is that the world's best player carries a target on his back and that everyone wants to beat him, which is true, but actually the least significant part of the burden. The real weight of number one is mathematical, and it is relentless, and it operates independently of how well you are actually playing. It means that every tournament you enter, you are not competing to gain points. You are competing to avoid losing them. That is a fundamentally different psychological contract than the one every other player on tour has signed, and it is one that changes how tennis feels at its most basic level. Alcaraz is walking into this clay season with approximately 4,300 ranking points to defend across Monte Carlo, Barcelona, Madrid, Rome, and Roland Garros. He won all of them last year except Barcelona, where he reached the final. To put that in perspective, Jannik Sinner, the man chasing him in the rankings right now, has virtually nothing to defend on clay at all. Sinner missed the entire 2025 clay season because of his doping ban suspension, which means he goes into every single one of these tournaments with the same psychological freedom that a wildcard has. He is playing with house money. Every win builds. Every loss costs nothing in terms of ranking. Alcaraz, by contrast, enters each event knowing that anything short of a title is, in real numerical terms, a step backward. That asymmetry that one man is hunting and the other is being hunted is the structural reality underneath everything Alcaraz has been saying in press conferences recently. And I think it explains a lot more than people are giving it credit for. When he says he is just trying to have good sensations on the court, what he is describing is the loss of something that was once automatic for him. Alcaraz's entire game is built on instinct and aggression. His best tennis has always come from a place of total freedom. That quality he has of doing things on a court that nobody anticipated, not because he planned them, but because his body and brain are operating in complete sync, and the inspiration just arrives. Watch him at his best, and you are watching a player who genuinely seems surprised by his own genius sometimes, which sounds like a strange thing to say, but it is actually the truest description of what makes him different from everyone else on tour. He is not a systems player. He is not a grinder. He is not someone whose game is built on the elimination of risk. His game is built on the willingness to take any risk at any moment if the moment calls for it. That quality is his greatness, and it is exactly the quality that the weight of defending 4,300 ranking points is quietly beginning to erode. What you need to have in order to play Alcaraz's brand of tennis is the freedom to fail without consequence, at least within the point, within the match. You need the psychological space to attempt the wrong shot and move on without it haunting you. And here is what is interesting. Alcaraz has said himself that the opponents he faces no longer have that same pressure they would carry into matches against other players. He has noticed it. He has named it explicitly. They are playing loose because they have nothing to lose, and what he is doing in those same matches increasingly is trying to manage rather than express. Not consciously, perhaps, but the numbers from the end of the hard court season suggest the beginning of a pattern. That perfect 16-0 start to 2026 gave way to losses against Medvedev in Indian Wells and Korda in Miami. Neither of those is a catastrophic result on its own, but the manner of the Korda loss in particular was telling. A third-round exit to a player ranked outside the top 20 on a hard court from a man who had just won the Australian Open and completed the career Grand Slam. The surface barely matters here. What matters is the creeping sense that something has shifted in how Alcaraz is processing what it means to compete right now. His coach, Samuel Lopez, touched on something in an interview after the Miami exit that I found genuinely revealing. He was talking about the physical versus mental demands of the modern Masters 1000 format, and he made the point that these events are not as physically intense as they were in Nadal's era, when players competed day after day without rest days. But what Lopez identified as the new challenge is the sustained cognitive load, the mental endurance required to stay sharp across a 2-week event when the physical demands are not high enough to blunt the brain's tendency to overthink. What he was describing, without quite naming it directly, is a kind of fatigue that comes not from the body being depleted, but from the mind carrying more than it should. And that is precisely the thing you can see beginning to show in the way Alcaraz has been talking in the last few weeks. The resets, the talk of needing to reset the mind, reset the batteries, the going home to family and friends. These are not the statements of a player who is physically exhausted. They are the statements of a player who is mentally saturated in a way that is very specific to occupying the #1 position in the world. Here is something worth considering when you think about who has actually held this position for extended periods at a young age, because the historical comparisons matter here, and they point somewhere interesting. Rafa Nadal held the #1 ranking for long stretches, but his psychological architecture was built almost entirely around clay. He could rest psychologically even during losses on hard courts, because the surface itself took the pressure off him. Federer held it for record-breaking stretches, but Federer's game is so efficient, so structurally conservative in its risk-taking, that it was not eroded by the weight of defense the way Alcaraz's game can be. The closest parallel to what Alcaraz is going through, a physically dominant, instinct-driven player trying to sustain world #1 on all surfaces simultaneously while carrying massive defensive obligations, is actually Novak Djokovic in the mid-2000s, when he had won everything and was defending Grand Slams and Masters titles simultaneously, and began for the first time in his career to talk publicly about how heavy the #1 position had become. Djokovic eventually found a way through it. but not before a period of genuine vulnerability that most people at the time misread as complacency. What it actually was, when you look back at it now, was the same thing Alcaraz is experiencing. The cost of having built a structure so dominant that maintaining it requires a fundamentally different kind of effort than building it did. And I think this is the part of the conversation that most of the coverage this week has completely missed. The narrative around Alcaraz heading into Monte Carlo has been, can he defend his title? Can he keep Sinner at bay? Will he rediscover his best form on clay? Those are legitimate questions, but they are the surface story. The deeper question is whether the psychological inversion that comes with being world number one, transitioning from the hunter to the hunted, from the player building something to the player protecting it, is something Alcaraz has developed the tools to manage yet. Because at 22 years old, he has never had to do this before. Not at this scale. Not with this many points simultaneously at risk. Not with an opponent as motivated and as mathematically positioned as Sinner currently is. That quote of his about his opponents playing without pressure is one of the most important things he has said in a long time, and I want to explain why. It is not a complaint. He is not looking for sympathy, but what he is doing, perhaps without fully realizing it, is describing the asymmetry that currently defines his competitive environment. Every player on the other side of the net from Alcaraz is Alcaraz from 2 years ago, unencumbered, free-swinging, with everything to gain and nothing structural to lose. Alcaraz was that player. The joy, the expressiveness, the shot-making that made him the most exciting player on tour to watch came precisely from that freedom. And now he is on the other side of it, trying to play the same brand of tennis while carrying obligations that are structurally incompatible with it. That is not a small thing to manage. That is actually one of the most demanding psychological challenges in the sport. There is a clue in the way he has been talking about clay that I think points toward what his solution might be. He has spoken about this surface since he was a child, with something close to love, grew up on it, learned to play on it, misses it when it is gone. Clay is the one surface where Alcaraz's win rate is second only to Nadal in the history of the game. It is 84% across his career, which is an extraordinary number. And what clay does that hard courts do not is it rewards patience and physical expression simultaneously. It slows the game down enough that the brilliant shot has to be earned rather than just snatched. And in earning it, the player finds the rhythm that makes the brilliance feel natural rather than forced. When Alcaraz talks about needing good sensations, when he talks about getting back to feeling good on the court, what he is describing in a roundabout way is the specific kind of flow state that clay tends to restore for him better than any other surface. Monte Carlo last year was a turning point in his season, precisely because the rhythm of that tournament unlocked something that he had lost in the hard court swing. He has said as much directly. There's another thing that is genuinely worth debating, because I want to put a specific idea on the table, and I believe many people will push back on. The question is not whether Alcaraz can rediscover his best form on clay. I think he almost certainly will, because the surface suits him at a structural level that goes beyond tactics and results. The question is whether he can do it while simultaneously carrying the psychological weight of defending 4,300 points, which means he cannot afford a single bad week across a 2-month period. Those two things are in direct tension with each other. To play his best tennis, he needs psychological freedom. To protect his ranking, he needs to be cautious about exits. Those are not the same imperative, and managing both of them at once is something no one at 22 has had to do at quite this scale or this intensity. The coverage wants to frame this as an excitement story. Alcaraz is back on clay. Here we go. And that is not wrong, because there is also a version of this story where the weight of what he is being asked to defend across the next 2 months is precisely what prevents him from playing the tennis that made him worth defending in the first place. Now, I said at the beginning that I think the way most people read Alcaraz's press conference comments was wrong. And I want to close that argument properly because I think it matters for how you watch the next 2 months. When he said he was not thinking about defending a title and just wanted good sensations on the court, the dominant reading was that this showed mental discipline, that he was doing the right thing by not fixating on outcomes and focusing on the process instead. And in the vacuum, that reading makes sense, but it ignores something important. Alcaraz is not naturally a process-focused player. He is not built that way. He does not play his best tennis by breaking the game down into manageable components and executing them cleanly. He plays his best tennis by getting lost in it, by losing himself in the competition, by being so free in the moment that the shot selection becomes instinctive and the physical expression becomes joyful. Telling himself not to think about the title he is defending is not him accessing his best self. It is him managing a version of himself that cannot quite access that best self right now, because the structure of what surrounds him has changed. The sensations he is trying to find are not the sensations of a champion defending what he has built. They are the sensations of the player he was before he had all of this to protect. The reason that matters is that there is genuinely something at stake in this clay season beyond rankings and trophies. If Alcaraz navigates it, if he finds a way to carry the weight of number one without it changing how he plays, then he will have crossed a threshold that only a handful of players in history have managed. He will have solved the final problem of the truly elite: how to remain free inside a structure that demands you be careful. Federer solved it. Djokovic solved it, eventually. Nadal solved it on clay, almost instinctively. The question of whether Alcaraz can solve it at 22, in real time, across the most demanding 2-month stretch of his career so far, is the most interesting question in men's tennis right now. And I think it is a much more interesting question than the one most of the coverage is asking. I think Monte Carlo will tell us a great deal, not because of the result necessarily, but because of the manner. If we see an Alcaraz who is managing, who is winning matches on competence and experience, while the genuine freedom of his best tennis stays just slightly out of reach, then the pattern I am describing is real, and it will grow more significant as the clay season progresses. If we see an Alcaraz who steps onto the Monte Carlo clay and immediately looks like the player who won 33 of 34 matches on the surface last year, unencumbered, expressive, genuinely loose in his movement and his shot selection, then I will have been wrong about the depth of what he described in that press conference. But I do not think I am wrong. This is because what he said is possibly the truest thing he has said in public in months, and the fact that almost nobody read it as a warning is precisely the kind of thing that makes this sport worth watching closely. Alcaraz might not be able to successfully defend both Monte Carlo and Rome. He will probably end up lifting one of the two, and the other is where the cracks in the framework become results rather than just press conference subtext. As for Roland Garros, it's likely he defends it. The scale of that event, the week-long format that rewards depth over consistency, and the personal emotional significance of the place to him all point toward it being where he finds the freedom the smaller events take from him. But the Masters 1000 circuit across April and May might end up exposing something. Whether that exposure becomes a ranking shift depends entirely on whether Sinner, playing without any of the weight that is slowing Alcaraz down, can convert the opportunity that the structural asymmetry of this season has handed him. I know these takes of mine are going to land differently depending on which side of this rivalry you are on. Alcaraz fans will tell me I am overreading a few press conference quotes, and that the man just won the Australian Open and completed the career Grand Slam at 22. And they are not wrong to push back on that. But I think the evidence is right there in what he has been saying, if you are willing to listen to it rather than translate it into something more comfortable. He is not thinking about defending his title. He is just trying to feel good on the court. From the outside, that sounds like wisdom. From the inside, it sounds like something a little more complicated than that. Leave your verdict in the comments, and particularly if you think Sinner is going to be number 1 by the end of Roland Garros, let me see your reasoning for it. If this video changed the way you're watching the clay season, and if you're not subscribed yet and this is how you found the channel, now is the time. We always go further than the headlines, and the clay season is going to give us a lot to work through together.